Hello and welcome to 101 East. This week in Thailand, where it wasn't so long ago that the government believed it had solved the problem of the notorious Golden Triangle. But the latest figures show that opium production has spiked again, and a new drug, yaba, has taken the streets, and still the problem seems to be with neighbours Myanmar and Laos. The government's promising a new crackdown, and they say it might be unpleasant. I'm Taimur Nabili, and on this edition of 101 East we ask, can Thailand finally defeat the problem of the drug barons? Some 5 years ago, Thailand's then Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawat declared an all-out war on the country's drug problem. It turned out to be a short war, but a nasty one. Some 3,000 people are thought to have been killed, all of them allegedly drug dealers, but many of them in suspicious circumstances. The new government says it's learned a great deal from that experience, but it still won't rule out more deaths. SELINA Downs reports.
Please, the X-ray process will begin shortly. Please slip out from area for your safety. Thank you.
At a Thai border checkpoint with Myanmar, sophisticated X-ray machines are being used to combat the drug traffickers. The machines are scanning vehicles which may be smuggling illicit substances like heroin or methamphetamine.
Maybe about the drug. It's hidden in the car, in the wheel or the oil tank, maybe.
If a vehicle looks suspicious, police stop and search it. The driver and any passengers are frisked and questioned. Those crossing the border on foot are also subjected to careful scrutiny. Luggage is scanned and routinely searched. The officer in charge tells us a man was caught just a few days before trying to smuggle 800 pills inside condoms inserted into his body. Cheap methamphetamine pills from neighbouring Myanmar are a constant threat. There are some 3 million registered drug addicts in Thailand. That's about 5% of the population. The country has long considered drug control a priority. The former Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawat led a brutal crackdown in 2003 in which thousands of alleged drug dealers were killed. The deaths were condemned by human rights groups who later discovered some of the victims were in fact innocent. Thailand's new government recently resurrected the war on drugs, but even before the controversial policy was relaunched, the authorities claimed they'd been winning the battle for several years.
Our country is not the center of production anymore. They produce the heroin and other types of drugs in neighboring countries.
It doesn't stop the traffickers bringing illegal drugs into Thailand, and it doesn't stop the drug that makes heroin being grown here. Flying over the remote mountains of northern Thailand, it's easy to see why this is prime land for the country's opium plantations. Thick foliage and few roads make it difficult to access on foot. After decades of declining levels of opium poppies, last year the Thai authorities reported opium cultivation had increased 47% on the previous year. Some say the ousting of the former Prime Minister and his brutal drugs policy has emboldened the dealers once more. It means more work for the Narcotics Monitoring Institute, who use helicopters to scour the difficult terrain. They're being assisted by their colleagues on the ground, who are studying aerial photographs and satellite images on computer screens.
In this area, you can see they have 3 stages of the poppy. This one is mature one, nearly to harvesting. This one is the beginning.
Their task is a difficult one. Over the years, the poppy growers have become more cunning, hiding the opium crops amongst other vegetation. It's called intercropping, and it helps avoid detection from the air. But not this time. The surveyors have found what they're looking for near a small village on this mountain. They note the coordinates, and we fly back to base. A few weeks later, the ground crew moves in. The Royal Thai Army has been involved in the country's opium eradication program for some 20 years. We reached the outskirts of a local village we spotted from the air. The locals seem to know they're about to lose their only source of income. Like most of the opium farmers across Southeast Asia, they're poor and from ethnic minorities. This young man pleads with the authorities not to destroy the crop. He says the village relies on it for its meagre income. He later tells us they keep some of the opium for the village elders, who use it for pain relief. The rest they offer to the brokers, who sell it on to the refineries producing heroin. This crop could have netted them around $1,000 US. Not today. The military must destroy the illegal crop and the eradication begins. The villagers are encouraged to take part. They don't dare refuse.
We patrol often. After we have found the field, we destroy them. Now we have more cooperation from the Hill tribe.
In return for their cooperation, the villagers aren't arrested. They're given rice and blankets, but it's little compensation. They're also offered a crop replacement scheme pioneered by Thailand's revered King Bhumibol. This coffee plantation in the mountains of Chiang Rai was once used to cultivate opium, but the land was given over to coffee beans instead.
In the past, the villagers here grew a lot of opium, but they had to change locations all the time, moving all the time, because with the opium poppies, you can't use the old land.
These villagers don't seem convinced. They tell us they'll plant opium poppies again next year. They say they have other plots the authorities haven't found yet. While Thailand might be winning the war against large-scale opium production, it may be losing the battle at a local village level. Hundreds of smaller plantations like this one are cropping up all over the north, and that's as much of a concern for the authorities. They're hoping the recent surge in cultivation may be just an anomaly, one they're keen to nip in the bud. If the government's new war on drugs is anything like the old, amnesty for villages like this one may be short-lived.
Joining me now to discuss drugs in the Golden Triangle and their impact on Thailand and the surrounding nations, I have with me Mr. PITHAYA JINAWAT, who's the Deputy Secretary General of Thailand's Office of Narcotics Control Board, Mr. Akira Fujino, who is the Asia-Pacific representative of the UNODC, and Mr. KRAISAK CHOONHAVAN, who is a Thai opposition MP. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being with us today. Let me get a broad picture perspective, if I could begin with you, Mr. Fujino. 5 or 6 years ago, there was a great deal of optimism. There was a great deal of hope that there was progress being made. How would you characterize the situation of drugs around the Golden Triangle area today?
We are cautiously optimistic. Progress is all being made. In other words, for the last decade, we have been seeing a constantly declining trend in illicit opium poppy cultivation.
But the trend seems to have reversed.
Well, last year, as compared to the year before, there was a slight increase, and yet about 10 years ago, there was a slight increase also, and then went down. Therefore, in order to see whether it was a trend or not, we have to see the survey result this year.
We saw the Thaksin administration cracking down, some say extremely heavy-handedly, and now we're hearing the Samak administration suggesting that they're going to crack down even harder. I mean, they're talking in terms of a serious campaign.
The government policy addressed that although we will implement the harsh measure, but we have to stick to the rule of law principle, not to violate the human rights or even not to implement the discrimination policy or even a prejudice policy. We have learned a lot from the previous policy.
Well, you say that. The previous policy came under an enormous amount of criticism, and the current Prime Minister has spoken very boldly and frankly in terms of thousands of deaths being acceptable in this campaign. How do you characterize the government he is responsible?
Yes, it's uncalled for. It's almost, I would say, stating a policy of impunity. In fact, almost barbaric to do that.
Because let's step back a second and look at Mr. Thaksin's approach to this. Just characterize how that worked out, because as I say, there's been an enormous amount of criticism from human rights groups.
Yeah, that's worked out to be a widespread of extrajudicial killings throughout the country. The number rising to nearly 2,800 dead, you see, out of 2,500 cases. He wanted to quickly wipe out the drugs problem in a matter of 3 weeks, and he gave very strict order to get rid of, for all the officers to show results.
Does the UN have guidelines, if you like, suggestions, experiences that it shares with local governments as to how situations like this should be handled?
Well, drug issues cannot be handled by, as we all know, by one country alone. Right? And then I do not think that in the Golden Triangle that methamphetamine is replacing opium.
But just from a policing perspective.
What is needed is because Thailand does not illicitly produce methamphetamine anymore. It used to happen, but because of tightened controls over those starting materials called precursors, as well as joint law enforcement activities, as well as demand reduction efforts, things are changing, and therefore what Thailand is doing together with other countries, joint regional actions,
all right,
that is necessary.
Well, let's talk about the regional aspects of this and the broader implications of the international elements that are involved. In just a moment, we'll have to take a short break. We'll come back in a couple of minutes, and when we do, we'll bring you the story of one opium farmer in Thailand who's had to change his whole life in reaction to the situation he faces. Stay with us, we'll be back in a couple of minutes.